So you're going to unravel a sweater for yarn, but you're not sure where to start. You are worried about running into some problems and you want to know how you can work through those when you get there. I'm going to run you through what I'd call sweater unraveling theory. um, the principles of how a commercially constructed sweater is usually put together, and how you can work through that to take it apart. What things you might run into that you may not be able to identify if it's not something you've seen before. So we're going to start with some basic overview of the setup of the sweater, and then we'll go into some more detailed how to actually physically take it apart. And so I'll put chapters in this. You can jump if you don't care about the first part, but I definitely recommend. I think it gives you a better idea of where to start and how to get to where you're going in the end. But thank you for joining me. I'm excited for this. So this is a weird angle, but I'm trying to show you the whole sweater so I can indicate with my hands, because it's a lot easier, like really visually, instead of just talking about it. So this is a drop shoulder sweater. So for this type of sweater, you're going to have a shoulder seam. With a raglan constructed sweater, you will have a seam here on either side. You won't have this, and that will just be folded over. So here we have front panel, back panel that are basically just big rectangles, and then we have our sleeve sewn on just here. With a raglan, basically just this is over here. That's essentially the shoulder seam, I guess. I usually start with the collar. I start trying to remove the collar, and then I go to the sleeve body seam. This seam along the side of the body and down the underarm of the sleeve is usually continuous, starting at the cuff down to the hem. You may run into issues in the armpit if there's any felting, or if there's like a strange join, you may have to cut it. But in that situation, you will still be working from the armpit down. I don't think I've ever seen a sweater zip upwards, like from the bottom up. And then after I do that seam, I'll then go back and do the arms. Sometimes I'll do the shoulder early on. Really, like if you run into a tough spot, just move on to a different section of the sweater and try it out, and see if you can get yourself a little further, and it'll make things a little easier. But you just never know. They're all going to be a little bit different. So for this one, I'll definitely do collar first, and then hem. I'll show you an illustration of this, but a lot of times your hem, either your cuff or your hem, will have some form of reinforcement. It might be some weird form of knitting, or it might be just sewn over with a stitch. So you'll have to deal with that first. Also, definitely take out any tags and pick out any like sewn bits first. The care and material and like tag on the side, and obviously the size and brand tag. So I'd say that's a quick overview of how these are constructed. Every sweater is going to be a little bit different. Every brand's going to have a different way that it was put together, all of that. So there's no like one true way, but I think that gives you a good idea of like a baseline of where to start understanding this. So yeah. I'm just going to flip this guy inside out so we know what we're working with. We can see all our seams. So the first thing I usually do is go through and pick out all the threads or on the tags so I can pull those off. I use some little scissors or a seam ripper, whatever I have on hand. I gotta be careful not to snip the actual yarn of the sweater and get all those little threads out so that they don't cause you problems later on. And don't forget the inside tag if it's there, or even if someone might have cut it off, make sure you like get the threads there, so if you're unraveling, it doesn't stop you up when you get to that point in the sweater. As I mentioned, your hem and your cuff may have some kind of reinforcing. Mine has this stitching right here, so I'm gonna have to pick that out before I can do anything else. So this is what my little tail is gonna look like when he's free. Mine was sewn on, but a lot of times they're just woven back into the rest of the hem. You're also going to want to identify the chain stitch on your sweater that holds everything together. Look for the V's like that on that side, because the other side's just going to be a straight stitch that's hard to find. It may be in a contrasting yarn, but it's probably going to be in the same color as the rest of your sweater, so look close. So my sweater is inside out. Gotten all my little ends loose. We want to get all those things loose first so that we're not trying to figure out where to start pulling things apart. It makes it easier later on as you're doing this. It may not be perfect. You may find one that you missed. That's okay, but it's just a good place to start. So I start with the collar, but first we're going to look at this chain stitch. So if you know crochet at all, you know what a chain stitch is. We've got a V side and we've got this like rounded side that the other stitch is going through. So we're going to want to look in the opposite direction of where that V is pointing. That V is pointing this way. We're going to want to work along this chain stitch facing the other direction till we get to the point that it starts, because that is where you're going to be able to start unraveling from. So see, I have this tail and hopefully you can tell, I have the V pointing this way. So this is where this is ending. So this should be pretty easy for me to start. Let's see if I can get it on camera, if I'm gonna have to like stop and pull this out. It might be a little complicated. You can also, I can take my little scissors and I can just go in here and snip. I can snip that first stitch and worry about that start, whatever's left there later. Also, it helps honestly to have a darning needle. But I low-key lost mine under the couch, my last one, so I'm kind of screwed. Let me see, did I get it there? Just a little stuck. See if we can work it apart. It can be kind of tight. It can be hard to start. Oh, look, I didn't get all of the little snip I was doing right there. There we go. So now I'm pulling that stitch over and I can just pull. There we go, it's coming apart. And pull that off. And now I've got almost an entirely separate collar piece. I'm gonna have to deal with it a little bit because I snipped it at the beginning, but she's almost entirely separate. She definitely has, I'm referring to the sweater as though it's a woman, but I'm gonna have to, it's not knitting around, like none of these pieces will be knitting around. So there's another seam right here when I get it apart, so that I'm gonna have to undo that as well, so that I get a rectangle that I can then unravel for yarn. You see we've got two live edges here, so one of them will be the start and one of them will be the end. So I'll pause this and then we can move on to the sleeve and body seam. Okay, so we're over here at the cuff. I'm trying to make sure this is in frame, but I haven't done this like this before, so we'll see how it goes. Sorry if I bump the camera as well. We've got my other little end living out here, so we know where to start. These, like I had said before, this one was sewn. They can be, they usually, I see them woven into the seam right here. They just take a darning needle and go back through. And those are pretty easy to pull out. Sometimes you have some weirdness in how the cuff is constructed. This one's pretty basic. You may, in some cases, honestly, just have to snip off the whole cuff if you've got something weird going on. Sometimes it doesn't work. See. So we're looking at this again, and I have my V pointing that way, so I'm looking for this end, pretty much always going to be the cuff. So I just got it started, and sometimes it gets stuck. You can pull apart this way and then pull a bit here if you feel like you're getting stuck. If it's like a halo-y fuzzy yarn, you're going to have a harder time with that. Let's see if I can zip this down all the way, or if it's going to get stuck at the armpit. You see, I've got it opening right up here. Oh, see, this one broke at the armpit, but it's still, yeah, it's still continuous. So either I accidentally cut something there while I was trying to pull apart a seam or something else. And we can zip this, hopefully. Yeah, see, it's caught a little bit. Just pull apart. Zip this all the way down. Yeah, and you may have the same kind of issue at the hem where you've got some kind of reinforcement. You can just, I really, like, when in doubt, use scissors. Don't be afraid to just keep snipping. Try and avoid like this, obviously, but if you make one cut in a thread and you have to tie it together or felt it together as you're working with it, it's not the end of the world. So I can do that on both sides. I'll do the other one, then I'll come back and we can do the sleeve and the shoulder seams. So I'm looking here with the sleeve and the shoulder join. I think it's going to be easier for me to start with the sleeve seam. I've got my chain stitch. It looks like it's pointing that way, so I'm going to go find this end. Okay, we've got this end. And really, it's all just about manipulation. Like, I just kind of keep yanking, keep snipping. I'm not on a mission to save the chain stitch yarn. It's usually either something kind of scrappy, or it's like a totally different fiber or color. So it's not, or it's a different weight entirely. So I'm not really focused on saving this, so I don't mind cutting it a whole bunch of times. There we go, we've got that. A whole sleeve panel off, woohoo! So now let's do the shoulder. Which direction is it pointing? That way. So we're going to go over here. That's where my collar started. So it's already kind of pulled apart there. And whoop, stuck a little bit. So we're going to yank. There we go. Got my whole one side pulled apart. So I'll do the other one, then I'll come back and we can start, sorry, talking about how to unravel each panel and how these can sometimes be stuck. Okay, so I have all my pieces apart, and I picked this sweater for a reason. I picked this sweater because it looked like it was a really simple construction and would be easy to pull apart on camera, but it definitely can be a lot more difficult. One thing that's a big pro for this sweater, it looks like, is all of these stitches that that all the seams were through are all live. So I can just start pulling apart, it'll come right apart. Typically what I see in commercially made sweaters, this one's older, so it's gonna be a little bit of a different construction than more modern sweaters. More modern sweaters I see, they'll have these live stitches, but instead of them being totally live, they'll do a chain stitch over and through each one of these loops. So you're gonna have to do the same thing, find the end of the chain stitch, pull it apart. You may find it easier to just snip somewhere in that row, like cut it across and then just take all that broken stuff off and start from there. That may be easier. Another thing about this sweater, because it's drop shoulder and because it's a little older, there is not a whole lot of shaping. Right here, I have a little bit of a raised neckline. What you're usually gonna see in the front panel, especially if you have a V-neck or a U-neck. So one shoulder is going to be worked up, and then the other shoulder is going to be worked up, and this will be bound off stitches down here. So there's no way to tell which shoulder they started on. You're just going to have to pull apart one shoulder, start with one shoulder and start pulling it apart, and you may get stuck, or it may just come off separate because they'll have had to work the panel, work the shoulder, cut, and then go back and work the second shoulder, just like you would when you're knitting a sweater. So keep an eye out for that. Another thing that you cannot look for, sadly, in the store is sometimes, I don't know how it's done in a factory, but sometimes these panels are knit with two separate strands of yarn. That is a pain in the butt for sure. You can deal with it. It's still usable yarn, but what you'll find is you'll pull apart one row, and then there will be a second end, and you'll have to pull apart from that row to this direction. So you have two ends. So you'll have to alternate between both. You can't just pull them at the same time, and that will definitely take longer. For this overall, I do recommend having a ball winder. I'm not really one for telling people to buy stuff. I think you can go without it for a long time. But when it comes to this, I didn't buy a ball winder until I started unraveling sweaters. I don't think you need a Swift. I've been knitting for a couple years now, and I didn't buy a Swift until maybe 3 to 6 months ago. So you can definitely avoid that. You could buy one or the other, but I feel like a ball winder is more versatile in the other things that you could use it for. It'll make this a lot faster, but you can definitely do it by hand. Yeah, so let's get into the unraveling. Okay, we've got started. I have my ball winder set up. You can definitely, like I said, unravel with your hands and make a ball. I honestly would recommend, if you're doing that, just pull it apart. If you can do this one sitting, pull it apart into a pile on the floor, all of it, and then wind it into a ball. That will be easier. It will be fine probably in the pile. I do that all the time, and it seems to have worked so far. It hasn't caused any big issues. So I'm going to start with a sleeve. I have my winder just on a piece of fabric so I don't hurt the paint on my table. Finding the end. Make sure you got it started a little bit first. The first row may be a little difficult. Just maybe kind of felted together with the seam. Get that started. And there we go. You see how this is kind of, it's not very efficient, is it? I know this is simple, but it works. I just fold it. I just fold it as many times as I can. And I hold it pretty tightly in my hand, so I just have this little bundle. And it just comes apart, just like that. Yeah, it'll take a little while. Some of them are going to be harder to come apart than others. I know it's a very basic thing to cover. You may have an issue when you get to the cuff. Like I've been talking about the reinforcement. Sometimes it's done a little differently. Sometimes that 2-strand thing doesn't happen for the whole body or the whole like arm of the sleeve, and then you get to the cuff and they have started that. Maybe they have a 2nd strand to reinforce or whatever, just to make it a little more durable, which makes sense. Just look out for that. Sometimes the hem is easy to unravel. Sometimes it causes an issue. Another place where you might just have, like the hem, by the hem I mean like the very edge. You may have to just snip that off. It won't be a huge loss in yarn. So I guess basically don't be afraid to use your scissors. Don't be afraid to cut things if you need to. And yeah, good luck. I believe in you. If you're having a big issue, feel free to reach out. Like I'll try and get you through that as best I can, if I can. But thank you for watching. I hope you learned something. I hope this helped you. And have a great day.